Okay, we've played Halo without shooting, without driving, without jumping, and in some cases even without walking. But it's definitely very interesting to try to play through a Halo game without killing anything along the way. Now recently we did the first Halo Trilogy, and that was really interesting. There were a lot of levels that we absolutely did not think we would be able to complete that were in fact possible, and then in some cases levels that we thought would be a walk in the park just completely stumped us. But there is something very interesting we started to notice in the first video that we did, which is while the Halo sandbox continues to grow, sometimes the intricacies between what triggers a level to progress to a next section can also get more complicated. And it made us wonder if the more recent Halo games, the ones that released after the first trilogy, end up having more levels that are completable without killing a single enemy, or less levels along the way. So we got the gang back together and we decided to jump through Halo 3 ODST, Halo Reach, Halo 4, and Halo 5 Guardians so that we can see which levels are completable, if there are any other Halo games that can be completed beginning to end without killing, but also let's look at the stats between 343's era of Halo and Bungie's era of Halo and see if there's any really interesting statistics comparing these games across. So when it comes to ODST, the first thing that we thought that we needed to consider definitely was just straight up taking a look at Mombasa streets first. Now for the most part, we know that in all of Mombasa streets, there isn't any sections where you actually are required to kill any enemies. You just have to go and find the clues, except at the very beginning, which actually kind of managed to be one of the biggest and first roadblocks we ran into looking at this game. So when you're playing through Mombasa streets, essentially before you're able to progress in the level, you have to answer the phone from Virgil and click your way through the tutorial. Now the problem is, the phone that Virgil calls you on, that payphone that's in the future, because in the future people use payphones still, it only rings after you clear all of the enemies within the vicinity. Technically, that's why this level is listed as prepare to drop versus the actual Mombasa streets levels themselves. This level stands out because it's set aside from the rest of the Mombasa streets and serves as a tutorial. So here we are with our very first problem that we would have to find a way around. Now, fortunately enough, we've managed to run ODST like a billion times by now. You know, we just look for glyphs every chance we get. And we actually know that one of the biggest speedrunning strategies bypasses the tutorial altogether by doing a trick called spawn bumping, which is only possible in co-op playthroughs. Fortunately, we're doing co-op playthroughs for all of these videos, so we had to learn how to do this trick, which essentially isn't too hard. You just have to have one player stand in between the door that later on opens when you do the tutorial, while the other player dies and respawns. And if you do it at just the right angle while the player is standing and walking into the door, the other player will hopefully, if done correctly, respawn on the other side. It might take a few tries, but once we're able to pull this off, from there we're able to run all the way through the rest of the level, making our way up to the recon helmet. And one of the first problems was actually solved pretty quickly, and we're feeling good because we knew the rest of the Mombasa streets levels are easily possible. So now all we have to do is clear the main levels in ODST, and we can maybe check this one off as another Halo game that is completable. So first up was Tayari Plaza, which we've run through this level multiple times in the past, and as long as you just kind of keep moving, you can dodge those hunters at the end. Now we were a little bit unsure going into the level whether or not we'd actually have to kill the grunts in front of the pod. You actually don't have to, you just press the button and boom, this level's cleared. Uplift Reserve is another one of those short levels you can also just speed through. The main issue we had to run into was making sure we didn't accidentally kill an enemy in the process when we were driving as quickly as we were. We did bring along a Marine to do some shooting for us in one of the Warthogs. Not that we actually needed him, but we just enjoyed his companionship and company on the very short journey that Uplift Reserve was. Kazingo Boulevard was a very interesting level to say the least. Essentially, it's pretty easy early on. It gets a little tricky though when you meet up with Dutch. Now, to open up the door that leads into the final firefight section, you have to clear all of the big vehicles in the area before, specifically the Wraiths. Now, since we can't kill anything, we decided it would be up to Dutch to maybe do all the work for us, and we gave him a rocket launcher, and honestly, kind of was a little bit toxic. Can I say he was toxic with it? I'm pretty sure he was toxic with it. I don't know. The first team kill, okay, whatever. Maybe we're standing in his line of fire. but the fourth one? I don't know. I don't trust Dutch. Eventually, after giving him a few nudges to make sure he had a good line of sight on the race, he did clear the area and were able to progress through the level. Next, we're going on to Oni Alpha Site, and interestingly enough, the first area is pretty fast paced. We just ran through hitting the switches, and we already know that technically we don't have to press the button on the bridge if we just don't press anything. So technically, if anyone dies because of the bridge explosion, hey, the blood's not on our hands. The outside part going in towards the base is incredibly slow, as we had to wait around for the Marines to do their best to kill all of the enemies. We kind of just acted as meat shields where we could to keep things moving along, but things definitely are able to progress when you just kind of wait around and hope that your Marine and ODST buddies do the work for you. Indoors is a little bit interesting. The first couple of waves aren't any problems, but when they fly in on Phantoms, things go absolutely haywire. All these brutes jump in and they will right away just wipe any of the squad mates you have alongside you, and there's not much you can do to try to protect them or keep them alive. Now, fortunately, Mickey has plot armor, so he can't die, but he also doesn't push up to help in any means at all. So the main strategy we ended up going for was to try to aggro the brutes and have them push on us, and then we would try to fake them out and cause them to fall off the map to their death. Now, this did work a couple of times, and the other times we kind of just baited the enemies in the sightline of Mickey and just hoped for the best that Mickey would shoot at them and finally kill them all off. So we had a little mix of tricking some brutes and having some brutes luckily killed, and also one brute mysteriously died. We didn't know what happened. We went back into theater to figure it out, and we still I have no idea what really happened. Nonetheless, after you do eventually clear this whole area, you push back up to the top, you get some more Marine buddies to help you out again, and you can clear the rooftop area in this level without killing. But after that, we were moving on to NMPD HQ. Okay, so NMPD HQ, it's actually easy peasy. You just kind of run on through everything, avoid getting killed by some sniper jackals, and then make your way across and chill with some ODSTs who do all the work for you. You can look at the nice scenery and listen to some cool music while they do all the work, but then after that, you're moving on to Kikowani Station, one of my personal favorite levels from ODST, and once again, this level, there's really not that much to it if you are not trying to murder everything in sight. Essentially, we just had to grab the Banshee, fly around a bit, open some doors, fly ahead, not blow up the squid houses, because that's not nice, fly ahead some more, open some more doors, and then essentially we fly to the section with the giant scarab, and as you may or may not know, you actually don't have to fight the scarab at all. You can just fly right past the scarab and open the door and fly into the next room. But then we did run into a little bit of a predicament, because to end the level, you're supposed to blow up the squid houses. We weren't sure if this actually counted as killing something. I mean, we kind of insinuated in the first trilogy that Sentinels counted as a kill and Forerunner technology would be a kill, and technically the engineers and possibly these squid houses are that same type of Forerunner energy, just more in a synthetic biologic way. And while we were having that debate, we were abruptly reminded by our fellow ODSTs in the Phantom that if we don't shoot quick enough, they will. So debate ended. We were able to clear this level without killing. Next up was Data Hive, which we were somewhat optimistic for, just to have our optimism quickly shredded to pieces. The first couple sections of this level weren't too hard. We just ran past the enemies, dropped down a level, run past some more enemies. It was pretty straightforward. We even met this really nice police officer character who sadly didn't make it past the buggers. The main problem we run into, though, is when you get to the final section before you would typically meet up with Dare, there's these enemies that are blocking the door, and Virgil won't open up the door until they're cleared out. And essentially, since we're not already with Dare, we don't have some character with us to take out the enemies for us. So unfortunately, you are required to kill all of the enemies here if you want to progress in this level. Now, some of you may be wondering what would happen if you had all of the audio logs collected and the police officer came with you into the area down below. And fortunately, we didn't have to test this, because for whatever reason, months ago, I tested how far I could get the police officer to come with me after we went through and did the audio logs for the 400th time. And for whatever reason, while the police officer does in fact turn on you and will try to kill you, you can only actually bait him to come down the ramp outside of the iced room where you typically go in with him. So unfortunately, you can't force him to come to the next area with you, and thus he won't fight in your favor. So this level unfortunately kills the run, which is disappointing because we did get so close with Data Hive. But from there, the main thing that you have to do is rely on Dare to take out the brutes on the way in, and then rely on Dare and Buck to protect Virgil the best that they can on the way out. We are a great meat shield in the process, but we're not going to kill any of the enemies while we're making our way out of there. So we did complete this level, but it was a little bit of a disappointment, but we still wanted to see how ODST stacks up against the other Halo games, so we were on to Coastal Highway to test that level as well. And fortunately enough, if you're reliant on your fellow ODSTs, you can get through the outside area before going to the actual highway part itself. This time we made Buck jump on the turret and shoot at the enemies for us, the way you probably would play this level single player anyways. And since we were not on some super elevated high difficulty, it was pretty easy to drive through this. The Gauss Hog is great as well in the later sections, and then we just skipped the tank. Then at the firefight section, it just became more of Halo 3 ODST Meat Shield Edition, where we just ran around and took shots to make sure Virgil was never in danger. But yeah, after that, ODST was completed, and we were able to beat the entire campaign with just one level that was impossible to beat without killing. We were actually quite surprised. We thought there might be one or two more instances where we would have bigger problems. For the most part, ODST was pretty smooth sailing through and through. But next to his time, we took a closer look at Halo Reach. So jumping into it, Winter Contingency is an interesting level. You can run through the opening areas and try not, to the best of your abilities, kill the MOAs at the beginning. And then from there, we just kind of ran through everything, letting the rest of Noble Team do all the work for us. And for this whole firefight section, you really don't have to do anything either. So it's kind of just a game of waiting around and doing nothing. The one interesting thing about this level, though, that we were completely curious about and actually had no clue was in the final area when you have to take out the elites in the server room. We really didn't know whether or not George would move up far enough to kill the elites, or if George would even have a line of fire consistently enough to manage to take the shields down on the elite. Now, for the most part, George does clear out all of the enemies moving up till that point. When you get to the actual server room itself, it does become a bit trickier because there's so much cover for the elites. Fortunately, after a lot of running around and just trying to see what we could do with the elites, one of them did manage to move all the way up towards where George and the rest of us were, and we may have had to do some noble sacrifices so that George could consistently have a line of fire on this elite, but the elite was able to be killed off. But we still had two more elites that we had to take out, and those ones refused to push up the way the other one did for the life of them. Matter of fact, any time that George just shot a couple of rounds at them, they would retreat back into the room completely out of sight, making it very difficult for us to feel like we're making any progress. Eventually, what ended up happening, though, is we started to memorize how the elites liked to move, and we would purposely stand in key positions, blocking their entrance into that little back room. And while there still were technically ways to get past us, they honestly really wanted to go the ways around us, so sometimes we would just kind of body block them, and their AI would just choose to move somewhere else, keeping them out in the open. And by doing this, eventually George did manage to pick off the two elites one by one. So surprisingly enough, Winter Contingency was completed without killing anything. Sword Base is a little bit of a tricky level as you do have a ton of enemies on both directions that you go on. Early on in the level, you kind of have to wait around for Cat to clear out all of the enemies since you can't just target designate them. But once you have free reign to go to the other side of the level, you can just go and hit the two buttons that you have to hit before making your way back. And then as you push into Sword Base, we do run into this little area where there's these hunters, and it was just another matter of us completely waiting patiently for Cat to kill the hunters for us while we stood there taking the bulk of both of the hunters' anger right to our faces. After that, though, we were able to get inside of Sword Base, and from there we kind of just sprinted our way to the top, met up with Emil, and just waited for him to do all the work for us. Fortunately enough, this actually ended up working, and this level was cleared. So next we were moving on to Nightfall, and this level is honestly a speedrunner's dream. It's a pretty easy walk in the park where you can just run past all of the enemies through this entire level, and if you don't want to wait around during the firefight section in the later part of the level, you can just line the forklift up with this door, hop through the door, and then make a mad dash to the end of the level, and the level is cleared, and of course, you don't have to kill anything in the process either. So next up, we were on Tip of the Spear. Now, there's enemies all over the place on this level, and we were expecting it to get pretty chaotic, but fortunately enough, once again, we have Kat with us, so we were able to just throw her on the back of the Warthog, and we were pretty meticulous in having her take out most of the enemies. When we got to the part with the AA guns, we were a little unsure how we were going to manage to clear this part, because we don't want to blow up an AA gun and then accidentally kill some Covenant in the process. So our process instead was to make sure that Kat adequately killed every last soul in that area, so then when we did go in to blow up the AA gun, there'd be no collateral damage. No one would have died on our watch. After a little bit of an RNG-filled Falcon ride through the next part of this level, we honestly were able just to clear this without shooting and just kind of hoped nothing killed us in the process. But then we faced the big problem when we got to the top of Tip of the Spear, where it seemed like no matter what we tried to do, the elites didn't want to just jump off and kind of make this whole section easy for us. And unfortunately, you have to clear the area before you can press the button and end the level. Now, George, who's with you up until the top of the spire, for whatever reason, just doesn't want to push up. So unfortunately, this level is one of the first levels in Reach we can't actually beat, but things only get worse from here. Next, we were moving on to Long Night of Solace. Now, this level has a little bit of a reputation, because if you remember all the way back to when we did our no-shoot Halo Reach run, this level was absolutely heartbreaking. Essentially, there's these vehicle engines that, to progress to the inside section of the ship, you have to shoot at the engines. So we were already nervous going into this just because we know the flying section has caused complications. Now, the one thing though that we realized is that shooting those engines actually doesn't count as killing anything. So maybe this was possible. We ran through the beach area, just avoiding everything that we could and just waiting for Noble Team before flying up in the ship and going into the space area. And then we remembered the other issues we ran into on this level as well. Essentially, there's enemy Banshees and later on enemy Phantoms that you have to take out to clear this level. Now before, the way we figured it out was if we rammed the Banshees, they would blow up a lot of the time and we could progress until the Phantoms come, and then from there we could ram the Phantoms, it would deactivate their shields, and then the main ship would fire on the Phantoms, taking them out. And while the latter part technically could work in this run, to even get to the part where the Phantoms fly in, you have to take out the Banshees yourself, and there's no way to take out the Banshees without killing in the process. We were optimistic that maybe some of the other ships, because you have ally ships flying around, would take out the Banshees, but after waiting for a very long time, whenever we saw an allied ship even shoot at a Banshee, the few times that it would just be the worst aim you've ever seen in your entire life. It was just drastically off, so there was no way that that was happening. So as much as it pained us again to be defeated on this level, Halo Reach ends up being another game that is impossible to complete completely without killing a single enemy. Still, we wanted to be able to compare this to the rest of the Halo games, like ODST or even the Trilogy, so we moved along inside. We decided to use the Marines the best we could and keep them alive as long as we could so that we could make our way into the ship and then also make our way back out to where George was. And then from there, we let George just kind of do the rest during the final firefight before he yeeted us from the ship. And then we were moving on to Exodus. Okay, so Exodus is one of those levels where at first you're like, oh, how are you gonna get past this part? How are you gonna do this next thing? But the main answer is you have Marine allies with you pretty much throughout the whole level. So as long as you're careful not to let them all just get killed in one quick instance, you do have reinforcements that can do a lot of the work for you the whole way through. Like at this elevator holdout area, it's kind of chilled and took some damage. It did get a little bit tricky when we were going into the building where the Falcons come and pick you up, but we were able to get past this section as well. And then after a short Falcon ride, we were at the end area of the level. Now here you have to go and blow up some stuff, and there are some bigger vehicles in your way, but you have Marines with you. They can just hop on the turret and help you out. Trigger the button and bam, we were clearing this level as well and moving on to New Alexandria. So for the most part, we just pushed our way through New Alexandria, and for the most part, all you have to do really is either help some Marines out here and there or push inside and press some sort of jammer button. Now, since we typically have Marines with us, it's not too hard to make progress in this level, especially when you're doing the little side quests in the middle of the main level and you have Marines that can just shoot your turrets for you. It is funny kind of playing this level co-op and not relying on your teammate to do the shooting, but nonetheless, it was one of those levels we were able to get through. But then moving on to the package, this level is just pure chaotic energy energy through and through. There's so much going on in the earliest stages, but there's nothing really mandatory you have to worry about in the earliest sections when you're still outside. Just mainly you have to push forward and keep pushing forward and hope that your allies do all of the heavy lifting for you. After Sword Base, we then made our way down to the big underground firefight holdout place where you just have to hang on for your survival. And I mean, we could have used the auto turrets, we just didn't even use them, and we just let Noble Team do all the work for us. It did get a little bit crowded with some of the enemies and some of the bigger vehicles, but for the most part, Noble Team does work their way through killing every single enemy. Now, fortunately enough, when it comes to Pillar of Autumn, you just gotta get really from point A all the way to point B, and maybe like point C as well. So that was our main goal. We just kind of zoomed through as much of this level as we could, avoiding all of the enemies. We had a very enjoyable ride on the mongoose through everything. We dropped down after the brutes and into the caves where the buggers typically come, and we got to watch Carter yeet himself. And then from there, it was just some high speed running past everything. Now, the one interesting thing though is we didn't want to run too far ahead where we risk Emil glitching out, because when you get into the melting room, I don't know what to call this room, we think you have to kill some of the enemies to open up this door and progress through the level, and Emil is really our only savior when it comes to killing stuff, so we made sure that every time we were pushing up, we kept him with us in the process. But then we got to the outside area where all of the firefight waves happen. This one, once again, we were expecting it to be a lot trickier, but Reach sprinkled in some very good Marines to just help us just that little bit. We really had to rely on them here though, because if they died too early, we would be stuck essentially. So we were really good. We took care of them. We made sure they had band-aids when they got scratches. We really bonded with this group of Marines. It was really cool. Then after Emil had open heart surgery, we had to push up and make our way over to the AA gun. Now, there are a ton of strong elites right before you get to the AA gun that typically you want to take out, but since we also don't want to kill anything, we had one player run around with the elites and kind of just keep them distracted while the other player jumped in the AA gun and didn't shoot anything during that whole time. Now, interestingly enough, this also was a run killer in our no shoot run, and despite all the people saying you can fly a Banshee into the carrier, you can only do that if you mod the game and remove the sky barriers. So that's really irrelevant in this case, because essentially even with the AA gun, you're really just trying to slow down the carrier. You're not actually destroying the carrier, so the shot here doesn't count as killing anything. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Halo Reach is unfortunately still not possible to be completed without killing an enemy. Now, of course, we can still put Lone Wolf into consideration, unless you run into this weird issue where you choose not to kill anything, and in turn, you're kind of killing yourself because you die, but then at the same time, if you kill stuff, then you're breaking your own killing rules. So there's this kind of ambiguous question mark on Lone Wolf, but for technicality's sake, we're gonna say Lone Wolf does not count as any kills to complete it. So next, we decided we were gonna take a closer look at Halo 4 and Halo 5 Guardians. Now, the interesting thing when it comes to these games is we were unsure if we even wanted to cover them in the first place, because you look at Halo 4, it really turns into a matter of which levels can you even complete without shooting, because there's a lot of them that you can't. Right away on the first level, Dawn, to make any progress past this room, you have to kill enemies in order to press the button. So even with a trick like Dawn Skip, allowing you to fly straight through this level, you still are stuck right away, right out of the get-go with Halo 4. And then the rest of Halo 4 kind of falls apart pretty quickly. Like on Requiem, if you move past this next area, there's a couple of elites that you absolutely have to kill before you're able to progress the level. Okay, things do get a little bit easier on Mission 3 with Forerunner. There are a ton of different speedrunning tricks here, but technically we were able to get through this level if you use the speedrunning trick where you jump onto the button and then onto the rocks. You can just bypass all of the enemies. But then way later on in the level, you run into this point where you have to kill all of the enemies before the button lights up. So despite all the careful driving through the ghost run, this level is also not possible. So with Infinity, at first we actually thought this would be one of the levels that was possible, since you do have some Marines with you after you run through the early part. But even if we try to tank as many shots as we can for them, eventually all of the Marines just seem to die off relatively quickly. And even in a scenario where potentially we could have them survive until the doors open, they wouldn't actually follow us into into the next section where you have to clear enemies. On the level Reclaimer, at the early part you can actually make it pretty decently along. Now we were unsure if taking out these Forerunner turrets in the sky really does count because they're not really manned turrets, but they do have that Promethean code associated with it. It was kind of a gray area, but we weren't going to count it here, even though Halo 4 kind of is already dead. But it doesn't really matter because when you get to the part where you have to take out the Covenant ship, you have to hit the battery thing in there, which does result in the ship blowing up and dying. Now, once again, technically the ship could have just crash landed and everyone could have evacuated. I don't know why they flew off that way. So it's more of an indirectly caused death. I don't know. I feel like I'm really stretching trying to justify these as a non-kill run. But after you clear that section, there are some out of bounds areas that you can do, like you're speed running along. And once you are outside, you do have Marines assisting you towards the end of the level. The Marines will shoot the turret and shoot anything you need them to, including the little objectives, or you can just fly over and get to the end of the level. So this one's kind of a toss-up if we really want to count it as a level that's completable without killing. Then we actually saw another level that was doable with Mission 6 on Shutdown, where essentially, in general with this level, you can actually just skip the 2 pylons that are recommended you go to at the beginning of the level, heading straight to the last area that you go to. Just park your vehicle and jump over this weird door, and then bam, you're inside and you could bypass the majority of the enemies. The hunters on this level are technically the only thing you have to kind of face off against, and you can trick them into falling to their own death, which would have you innocent. But if you want to take it a step further and have no blood on your hands whatsoever, there is a speed running launch that just flings you past all of that, and you can get to the end of this level as well without having to kill any enemies. So hey, Halo 4, they made it so far with at least 2 levels. There you go. And then with Composer, this level falls apart incredibly quickly. Very early on in the first hangar room, you actually have to kill all the enemies before the door opens, and you can continue on through the rest of the level. So this one's already dead. And then with Mission 8, Midnight, we were a bit optimistic with this level through and through, as for the most part, there are sections you can kind of bypass, more or less. But we did know there would be one big roadblock towards the end of the level, where typically you have to activate the buttons before you go into the whole stage where Cortana attacks the Didact or whatever happens there. Nonetheless, to actually press the buttons, you have to kill all the enemies in the area, meaning that also this final level of Halo 4 is dead on arrival, or the end of the arrival. The departure? I don't know. So then we were faced off with Halo 5 Guardians, and we ran into a pretty big roadblock because Halo 5's campaign is built just dramatically different from the other Halo games, as you are set up in groups of 4. Now, from one perspective, we could approach this challenge where it's set from just the perspective of one player, or maybe 2 of us doing the run, and we have 2 AI-controlled bot teammates running alongside with us. And they'll gun everything down for us in our pathway, and pretty much make this entire challenge not really a challenge to begin with, but also just with the way that Halo 5 Guardians is designed, this challenge just in general doesn't quite work out the same way that the other Halo games can be faced with this challenge. For instance, things fall apart pretty quickly if you don't have the bot allies and you're trying to do a no-shoot run. Like, for instance, if you put 4 players in the roles of each character and continue the no-shoot run from there, which is what we planned on doing with Halo 5 Guardians. The problem is you really can't get too far with Halo 5 Guardians without having a bot-controlled teammate. For instance, right away on Blue Team, there's a couple of sections that just don't work out. There's a firefight in the end room of this level where you would have to have Blue Team there to actually help you, not controlled by players purposely not killing. But even before that, there's the room outside of the space room with the vents that you also have to clear as well. So we weren't really sure the right way to just approach Halo 5 Guardians in general. If you have a squad of bots with you, yes, you can complete Halo 5 Guardians without killing, but if you actually man up each Spartan and you go with a no-kill policy, you're going to run into problems on pretty much nearly every level in one way or another. The most interesting levels would just be the few where you have Marine allies with you, and just for the sake of doing this challenge in Halo 5, struggling our way through trying to get a Marine to move up so we can complete one level without killing something doesn't make as much of sense when we can just flip the AIs on to do all the work for us. So Halo 5 Guardians technically is completable front to back thanks to the squad mechanic, but also Halo 5 is kind of an outlier because at the end of the day, it's a game just built so much differently than the other games, so it doesn't fit into the same category necessarily. So what do you guys think across the board of every single Halo game? Which one is the most interesting in your opinion when it comes to doing challenges like this? We'd love to know your feedback and how you think we should approach these types of roadblocks into the future. Also, if there's something you'd like to see us do in the future, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Ultimately, it was really interesting getting to take a look at every Halo game because, as you can tell from the earlier Bungie days, for the most part, there is a way in a lot of cases to maneuver around some of the big roadblocks that would force you to kill an enemy to progress in Halo. But as time progressed and Halo's campaigns became more and more involved, it did seem to get a little bit harder to bypass in some of the levels when there's scripted sequences or the way that loading works in some of the more complex levels. This later would be carried on in Halo 4 and Halo 5 Guardians when 343 took over, and while we don't think that it'd be fair to compare a sandbox of situations across 343 and Bungie games, as in general just Halo has continued to evolve over the years, it is interesting to see how much scripting and sequential load sequences are built into those later Halo games, kind of preventing you from moving forward just by getting to a specific objective. But anyways, that's it for today. If you like our deep dive into the Halo games, make sure you guys are subscribed with notifications on. Otherwise, that's it for today. We'll see you all next time with a brand new video.